December 1983. Live on television, Rick James fired one phrase that threatened Michael Jackson's entire legacy, calling him a pop sellout, just as Thriller was rewriting history. Most artists would fold under that pressure, but Michael responded by inviting Rick James to Soul Train's own battleground. What happened next stunned 300 people, rewiring the rules of pop, funk, and cultural acceptance. The reason for this showdown is deeper than anyone realized. Rick James, already a towering figure in funk, sat beneath the glare of studio lights in December 1983. The cameras rolled as he leaned forward, voice steady, and he called Michael Jackson a pop sellout. The words hung in the air, not just as a jab at a rival, but as a challenge to the entire direction of Black music at the height of the Thriller era. At that time, Jackson's Thriller had already sold over 70 million copies, dominating charts and radio. Yet beneath the surface, a deeper conversation was unfolding about authenticity, crossover, and who controlled the narrative of Black artistry. James's words were not just personal, they echoed frustrations felt by many Black artists who were shut out by mainstream media. MTV, the new powerhouse in music television, played fewer than 1% Black videos in its early years. Even as Thriller forced the network to open its doors, many, including James, saw the price of admission as a dilution of the raw, unfiltered sound that defined funk and R&B. For James, whose 1981 album Street Songs had celebrated the grit and sweat of the genre, Jackson's polished pop represented a new kind of threat, a smoothing over of edges, a move away from the streets and into the boardrooms. In interviews leading up to that December, James made no secret of his position. He called out the industry's tendency to reward crossover acts while sidelining those who stayed true to their roots. He described the process as sanitizing real soul music for the suburbs, and he viewed Jackson's meteoric rise as the ultimate example. The pop sellout remark, uttered live and replayed in news segments and late-night roundtables, was more than a soundbite. It was a demand for a public reckoning. James wanted the world to question whether mainstream success could coexist with the raw honesty of funk. The timing was no accident. With Thriller breaking records and Jackson's face on every magazine, the music world was watching for the next move. James's challenge set the stage for a confrontation that would play out not in private, but in the most public arena possible. He wanted a platform big enough to test not just Jackson's credentials, but the very boundaries of Black music on national television. In that moment, the stakes became clear. This was no longer just about two artists, it was about who would define the sound and meaning of an entire generation. Soul Train was more than just a television show. In the early 1980s, it stood as the national stage where Black music defined itself, not just for fans, but for the industry at large. Every Saturday, about 300 people packed into a Los Angeles studio, drawn from a citywide lottery and local radio call-ins, each hoping to witness the next chapter in soul, funk, and R&B. The crowd was not just an audience, they were a jury. Artists who stepped onto that stage faced instant feedback from the sharpest dancers to the toughest critics. Don Cornelius, the show's creator and host, guarded the show's reputation fiercely. He chose acts that represented what he called the real thing, music with roots, groove, and an unmistakable connection to Black culture's pulse. By December 1983, Soul Train's influence reached beyond television. Record labels measured an artist's credibility by their reception on the show. A standing ovation from that studio could launch careers. A flat performance could end them. For a decade, the program had set the terms for what counted as authentic and what was simply chasing pop trends. Funk legends like James Brown and Parliament Funkadelic had electrified the crowd with raw, unfiltered sound. But the arrival of crossover stars in the late 1970s and the early 1980s, acts who blended soul with pop polish, sparked debate about where the genre's boundaries lay. Michael Jackson's ascent with Thriller brought that debate into sharp focus. By the end of 1983, Thriller had sold over 70 million copies worldwide, making Jackson the most visible Black artist on the planet. Yet his sound, crafted with Quincy Jones, packed with layered synths and radio-friendly hooks, stood in sharp contrast to the stripped-down, streetwise funk championed by Rick James. For some, Jackson's success was a breakthrough, proof that Black artists could dominate every chart. For others, it raised questions about whether mass appeal meant losing touch with the music's roots. Soul Train became the natural arena to settle those questions. The studio's 300 seats were filled with dancers, musicians, and fans who cared deeply about authenticity. They had cheered for James's bass-heavy grooves and watched Jackson's early performances as a child star. Now, with the world watching, Soul Train's stage offered the only place big enough and honest enough to decide whether pop and funk could coexist or if one would eclipse the other. In that moment, the show's authority was on the line, just as much as the artists' reputations. Jackson's approach to the Soul Train challenge was not about spectacle. It was about stripping music down to its core elements and letting each part speak. When the band kicked in, the first thing that hit was the bass, round, deep, unmistakably rooted in funk. Unlike the slap-heavy attack favored by Rick James, Jackson's bassist locked into a pocket that felt both anchored and elastic. The groove sat at 112 beats per minute, a touch faster than classic funk, but with a restraint that let every note breathe. Drums were tight, almost clipped, with the hi-hat riding just behind the beat, creating a subtle tension. There was no flash in the fills, just a steady, unshakable pulse that dared the audience to question its authenticity. Jackson's vocals told a different story. Instead of the soaring, layered harmonies that defined Thriller, he kept things raw. He sang in a lower register, holding back the signature falsetto, letting his phrasing ride the groove rather than dominate it. The lyrics focused on struggle and pride, echoing the themes that had always run through soul and funk. Every line landed with intention, but never with aggression. Music historians point out that this was a masterclass in restraint, Jackson using space and silence as tools, letting the band and the groove carry the message. Experts later dissected the performance, isolating the stems to reveal how each element worked in concert. The bass's warmth, the drums' discipline, and the vocals' understated power formed a sound that was both a nod to tradition and a quiet challenge to anyone questioning his roots. This was not just a response to Rick James, it was a demonstration of craft delivered in real time with 300 pairs of eyes measuring every move. The moment Michael Jackson finished, the Soul Train audience erupted. The sound registered above 110 decibels on the studio's audio meters, and it was louder than any taping in the show's 13-year history to that point. Stunned applause, gasps, and shouts filled the room, with dancers in the front row rising to their feet before the final note faded. Eyewitness accounts from that night describe a sense of collective disbelief, as if the crowd had witnessed something they were not meant to see. Don Cornelius, known for his measured composure, broke protocol at the close of the segment. He stepped forward, microphone in hand, and called the performance unprecedented. In over a decade of hosting, Cornelius had never used that word on air. His verdict carried weight not just for those in the studio, but for viewers at home who looked to Soul Train as the gold standard of Black music. Within days, the reverberations reached New York. Rick James, true to his word, arranged a follow-up at Harlem's Apollo Theater, putting $50,000 on the line. On February 14, 1984, Jackson stood before 1,500 people, stripped of choreography and special effects, and delivered a raw Motown ballad. The Apollo crowd, famous for its skepticism, responded with a 2-minute standing ovation. Press clippings from that week called it a moment of vindication, and word spread quickly through radio and print. The debate that had started with a single insult now had a public verdict. Artistry, not genre, would decide authenticity. In the months that followed, the lines between rival camps blurred. By March, Rick James's name appeared in the credits for the Jackson single titled Torture, a collaboration that would have seemed impossible just months before. Industry insiders pointed to that credit as evidence of mutual respect. The confrontation that began in a crowded television studio ended with two artists finding common ground and a community seeing itself reflected in the process. Legends shape reality, but truth demands evidence. As viral stories blur fact and fiction, our responsibility to question grows sharper. In an era where myths travel faster than music, only curiosity keeps history honest. What stories are we choosing to believe and why? Share your thoughts below.